I know. Well, first and foremost, good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jacquelyn Haley, and I run the UK Women in Hypnosis and NLP, based in the UK. But it's for women, but we've sneaked a few men in, and it's for UK therapists, but we sneaked a few stragglers in from across the borders, i.e. Wendie. And there's quite a few people that has come into the group. It's a small.
I've been trying to work towards one of them with both of my legs up for a long time, and it's the closest I've ever done.
Is that you?
Not me.
We need to give Daniel lines in the naughty corner, Daniel. Right. So anyway, so the group itself was put together to bring to really give women a chance to speak without the feeling that they were being hounded upon by, as we like to call them, the willy wavers in our industry. And because it does happen, and we decided to make this little group. And over the last year, it's kind of took a massive nosedive. And we just want to revive it really and see that the use you make of other wonderful groups, that you will bring it back to the UK Women in Hypnosis and NLP. I get quite excited when I've got a post to improve. So thank you for those who do contribute. Anyway, let's move on and into the evening. We've joined this evening by Tamsin Morgan from Suffolk, who is a specialist in trauma, particularly working with veterans. She's been a hypnotherapist for a number of years, was one of the former trainers with the UK Hypnosis Academy, and now has moved on to pastures new, and loving your new role in working with veterans.
Yes,
indeed. Excellent. We're also joined by Wendie Webber, founder and author of the Protocol and Devil's Therapy, based over in Canada. I think I stalked Wendie for some months before we struck up a friendship, because I was so kind of impressed. Anybody in any of the groups in the UK around the world that see Wendie will knock it out the ballpark every single time you ask her a question. She doesn't just give a few words. We have paragraphs of Wendie, and I got really familiar with the ... more as they come down. So absolutely sensational, very kind, very generous with all her time, and everyone who's come into Wendie's, come into contact with Wendie has absolutely been bowled over by all the information that she has and all the love she pours into everything that she does for us. So thank you, Wendie. Thank you for coming on this evening. And we also have Daniel Ghanime. Daniel's based over in Lebanon. He's a morphopsychologist. His expertise is teaching psychologists the art of hypnotherapy, hypnoanalysis. Oh, did I get that right? And of course, the regress to cause. So he is literally carrying the flame for us hypnotherapists into the field of psychology. And I did have the pleasure to join Daniel on one of his calls a few months ago with his students, and it was really, really enthralling is the word I want to use, to hear the way that how Daniel teaches them and the way they were grasping it and looking at the connections and the crossovers between the fields of psychology and what we do in hypnoanalysis. So yes, so that's the panel this evening. And the topic tonight is going to be the inner child. It's a hot topic across all social media at the minute, but in particular, we're going to be looking at forgiveness. And for those of you that are trained in Regress to Cause, development, if you're a rapid transformation course, you will know that forgiveness is a huge, massive part of our clients going on to heal, and that to be what we like to say, a permanent kind of healing. And forgiveness, when you discuss it in groups, it's one of those topics. You don't talk about regression and you don't talk about politics in some of these groups. It's like an instant forgiveness, that can't be possible. And for those of you who work with deeper trauma, when you get to that point of forgiveness, we do have a lot of resistance and resilience there. However, if the work has been done before, the forgiveness is the next part of a natural progression into their healing. So, Wendie, we're going to start with you, because you're the first person I really, really learned about forgiveness that made a lot of sense to me. Okay. Now, I don't want to be the one asking the questions this evening. And if you look at the bottom of the Zoom, you're at the bottom where we've got participants, chats, screen sharing, reactions. Okay. If you want to ask a question, right, just click reactions and you can wave. Okay. How do I get that off again? I'm not sure. You can wave and ask a question and we'll come to you. If you are talking, okay, please make sure there's no distractions coming through, nothing going on in the background, because it's really tinny over the microphone in Zoom. And if you want to go to the toilet, you don't need permission, okay? Emily teasing you. Right. Okay. So Wendie, forgiveness.
Am I on?
Yeah, I want to ask you, right, what is the biggest kind of barrier that you've ever had when it's come to teaching forgiveness? What would you say?
I think the biggest barrier is the biggest barrier we all face when we with hypnosis, and that's misconceptions about what forgiveness is. It's like, people go, oh, hypnosis, and so it's because we have these cultural misconceptions about what it means. And this is also true of forgiveness. Most people think that forgiveness is some kind of a religious thing, and it's not. It's to me, I mean, you've been through my course, so you know some of the things that I say about forgiveness. To me, forgiveness is the healing. It's not something we do. Healing isn't something we do. Healing is a byproduct of basically, creating the conditions in which nature can do what it was designed to do. And that's to set things right, to bring things back into balance and harmony. And so forgiveness is really just a byproduct of the healing process. So in my system, which is a 7-step healing protocol, forgiveness is the final step. And so that's where we want to get to. We want to get to that last step. So it's not something that we just open the door to and begin with. We're constantly setting up for forgiveness to happen. So I'm going to back. How many people here are actually trained in regression work? Okay, yeah, we got a few. Yeah, good, Daniel, excellent.
For those of you watching, you might want to put in the comments. Just put in the chat box if you've trained in regression work. Type yes.
Yeah, so you'll have to forgive me because I've been at this for so darn long, and my focus has been on actually doing advanced training for regression hypnotherapists. And so I don't speak to the general public. I haven't done that for a long time. So if what I'm saying doesn't make sense, please just like flag or make a comment or something, and I'll bring it down to and offer more detail. It's just, you're going to have to deal with how my brain works. So for me, forgiveness is really the final step in the healing process. Now, the type of healing that we do with hypnotherapy is kind of psychobiological healing, where the mind and the body work together. And so what we're wanting to do is remove the blocks, the things that are inhibiting healing from happening, rather than making something happen. So that's the general focus of regression to cause, is that we want to find out where a problem got started, and then we want to find out what in fact created a block to a person's ability to act in ways that they want. So we deal with behaviors, we deal with emotional responses, we do things like anxieties and panic attacks and those sorts of things. So we want to find out where those problems got started, and find out what in fact what happened to create a block to that individual's natural, normal function, a way of functioning in the world, so that we can restore that. And so a big part of that is removing those internal blocks so that they can feel safe and secure once again. And then we can sort of generalize that into their adult life. And that's another point too. Forgiveness is an adult thing. So we're talking about the inner child, and the inner child doesn't have to forgive. Okay, children don't have to forgive. Children are naturally forgiving. So forgiveness is not something that really applies to the inner child. What we want to do is do the inner child work first, do the healing with the inner child, so that the client can grow up to be fully an adult. When a person has a wounded inner child, they're trapped somehow in that event in childhood, and that part of them hasn't been able to grow up to adulthood. So that's really where we want, this is the focus of regression. We want to find out where the problem got started. Generally, it's in childhood. We want to do the inner child work, which is healing that part of the client that got trapped in that event in the past, so that that part can grow up into adulthood. We want to integrate all of those changes into the adult client. And now we have a real grown-up who is capable of doing the forgiveness work. So it has nothing to do with religion.
No.
Yeah,
It,
I would
it,
second that.
yeah, yeah. And of course, when you've done this kind of, this kind of forgiveness work, I mean, I've experienced it from the inside as well as facilitated it for others. And I can tell you that, it's just a very organic kind of a process that forgiveness happens. For me, forgiveness is a test for whether or not the healing is complete. And that's really all I use it for now. Now, with that said, I asked, how many people had done training, and the reason I asked that is because most of you were probably taught about forgiveness the same way I was. And that was that you were taught a protocol. You were taught that what you have to do is that you have to, come up with all the reasons and rationales and the logic for why a person needs to forgive. And it's very good for, for the therapist to understand all those reasons, because you've got to be able to beat those objections when they come up. But once you have a grasp on what forgiveness actually is, that's all you're going to use those things for. It's no longer a protocol. You don't have to talk the client into forgiving. It's not about convincing them to forgive. It's about finding out whether or not they're still holding on to the problem. So forgiveness is the antidote for anger. And anger is the last thing on the list that we want to clear because of how emotions develop. Fear is always our first response to a threat. That's what trauma is. Trauma is the perception of a threat while in a state of helplessness. The natural state of a child is helplessness. So that's where we're going to find a lot of those traumatic experiences to begin with. So we want to resolve the fears and the anxieties of the child first, get the child feeling safe and secure so that we can grow them up to adulthood. Now you've got a grown-up that can actually do the forgiveness work. It's the grown-up that's carrying the grievance. It's the grown-up that's holding on to the anger for all of the things that were done. It's all the times and all the ways that anybody ever hurt me. That's the grievance that the adult is carrying, and anger can create a lot of physical dis-ease. This is where, when you start dealing with life-threatening illness, you're going to find that there's quite a lot of anger that needs to be purged. But we want to pull the legs out from under that. And we want to clear the fear first, because people who are carrying a lot of anger are usually afraid of their own anger. And part of that's socialized, part of that's cultural, I'll give you something to be angry about, young lady. We're taught very early on to put a lid on, on those angry feelings. Anger's not nice. It's not ladylike. It's not, nobody likes somebody who's angry. And so we put a lid on that, and we put on our little happy face, and all of that stuff gets internalized. And the thing is you can't lie to your physiology. Your biology knows what's going on at a psychological level. So we want to purge that stuff. So we get the fear out of the way so that it is safe for the person to actually allow anger to step forward and be heard. And so we have these angry parts within us, just as we have these scared parts, these child parts. The angry part is the one that's been stacking up all of these abuses, stacking up all of these violations, these, all of these offenders, these perpetrators in our lives. And they can be little things and they can be big things, but they stack up over time. And so we want that grown up to feel safe enough to be able to look that in the face and say, I'm not putting up with that anymore. I'm not carrying that anymore. I am so done with this. Yeah. And that's where we can get that anger out and purge it.
And that's when they're sitting in front of us, really, because like I said, I mentioned that I've got a couple of Reiki practitioners on as well, but the alternative side of healing tends to be the last place. They might have exhausted all different avenues before they come to us. But there's something I wanted to say to you all, actually. Do you know when we have the anger, and I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up, it was quite common that when we did something naughty and we were in that emotional state of anger, whatever, upset, we were sent to our room alone, banished, put on the naughty step. And that message is strong, isn't it? You learn to deal with it
until you are calmed down.
Sorry,
you go to your room until you're calm.
Yeah.
They send you to your room until you're calm, and you deal with it and think about it. It's like you go there and compound it inside. It's like as if you're like as I always give that analogy of a pressure cooker, they take away that whistle and put a nail and hammer it and then put it on a hay fire and
Yeah.
and
Well,
wait for it to boil.
now
and
you've got
explode.
the anger that you started out with, and now you got anger towards the person who's oppressing you because you have that anger.
Exactly. So you're just compounding that anger.
Yeah.
Basically, anger is your ally. Actually, it's your best ally. It's the emotion that loves you most. It's that we've been taught that anger is something bad. Why are you angry? Why? From your boss to your mom to everybody. It's like, why are you angry? Why do you speak this way? Why are you angry at me? Um, it's an emotion of to highlight unfairness in your life. But the problem is, it's a problem or it's a solution. I don't know. But the problem is that it's a subconscious way to deal with that unfairness, and the subconscious does it as a 4-year-old child will look at things and will mimic it. So this is why if you're angry at someone that did so much pain to you, you want to cause them so much pain as a vendetta, something like that. So this is why you hang on to that anger as a 4-year-old child. But as Wendie said, it's an adult thing to do, to raise from that adult from that child to an adult. Because let's put it this way: the inner child is who has children? Who has children? Anyone? Me? Everyone? Yeah.
Leave a comment.
Yeah,
in the
I can
bo- in
see
the
that,
box.
Kate. I can, since Kate has her child next to her,
I can't see Kate. Let me
I
have
will
a-
be,
Sophia-
I will give that.
Sophia wants us to wave to her, by the way. Sophia says,
Yeah, I was waving, the
wave
whole
it to
time, and I have
Sophia.
a Mickey
Hey,
Mouse for
Sophia.
you. You have your Mickey Mouse with you, and I have my Mickey Mouse with me.
Wow.
So the thing is, like any parent with a child at home, let's put it this way: the family, parents and a child, is like the human being as a being. So the inner child is that child within the family. If that child is ill, the whole family is ill.
Yeah.
If that child is sick, the whole family is sick. So in order to get that family in peace, everyone will take that child to any doctor, to any psychologist, to anything, like just to get them back on track. And when they are back on track, peace is established. So that inner child of you, as a part of you, needs to be attended to, need to be listened to, needs to, this is the thing. And most of all, sometimes it needs to be forgiven. I don't know how many times I have, when I reach the forgiveness part too soon sometimes, or a bit, to start with reparenting that child. Sometimes they hate the child within. They say like, I hate her. She's stupid. She caused me so much pain. I don't. It's like it's a personal vendetta against yourself. And so what happens is like the concept of religion when it comes to forgiveness. It's so much upside down. It's like forgiveness, like forgive and forget, turn the other cheek and stuff like that. So I take the religious approach also. I take I take whatever happened on the night that Jesus was given to Caiaphas. When I know the names back then, like the guy who took Jesus for the trial, and then the slave of Caiaphas hit him on the on the cheek. Did he turn the other cheek? Hell no. He just stood there, and they asked him, "Why the hell are you just hitting me?" They didn't say hell anyway, but hey, let's put it this way: why are you hitting me for something I said or something I've done? So basically, even Jesus back then asked for fairness. So if you're taking that ultimate figure, doesn't matter, philosophically or religiously, and see it this way, whoever preached about turning the other cheek is asking for fairness. Who are you not to be able to release those things that are inside of you? So the question is, you are in pain, you are struggling with yourself, you have been in so much vengeance and like you're waging a war against someone who's dead like 12 years ago or 20 years ago. And then what would you do in order to get rid of that pain? What would you do to get rid of that anger? I will do anything. So let go. Just release that.
We've
Let
got
them go.
Thank you. Sorry, we've got a couple of comments that's come into the chat box, and Juanita saying, and forgiveness doesn't mean you have to have a relationship with the parent perpetrator. And Kate Beasley saying exactly, and I think that's important to explain to someone who has experienced abuse. I'm assuming Kate's responding to Juanita, which is a very good point to touch upon. When you are going into that, moving into that phase of forgiveness, it doesn't mean that you welcome in a relationship back with this person, that you want them back in your life again.
No,
It
no,
doesn't mean
you know,
that
the
at all.
the first rule to educate. Actually, it's about education. You start educating your client about forgiveness. That being, forgiveness doesn't mean that you accept what has been done to you. It doesn't mean that you condone what has happened in your life. It only means setting yourself free. Back then, we used to say, you know, like, forgive them and set them free. Now we say, forgive them and set yourself free, which it makes more like, it's more congruent using the term.
So I want to add something on that religious note, okay? Because there's you probably know, you know, what book this is in. I'm not very churchy, but you know, it's condemn the sin and forgive the sinner. And that's the kind of forgiveness work that we do. We condemn the sin. What was done was wrong. We're not denying that. Okay, in fact, we want to end the denial, because so many people are hurt by a parent, for example, you know, and they love the parent, but there's this conflict because the parent was the source of pain. We condemn what they did, but we forgive the person. So we're separating the sin from the sinner. We need to do that. Okay, and the reason we need to do that is because what was done has contributed to the client's identity growing up, and they have taken the sinner and they have internalized them. They carry them around inside of them, and that's what we're letting go. We're asking them to let go of holding on to that internal representation. So for all of you who are NLP workers, that's what that offender or that perpetrator is. They are an internalized representation of the person that hurt the client and generated all of that pain and subsequently the anger. Now, anger is a completely rational emotion. Anger is what steps in when fear can't get the job done. Fear says run away. If you're a 2-year-old, you can't run very far. You're not very strong. Okay. And so anger steps in to protect. It gives us power. And it's not always about fairness. Sometimes it's just about boundaries. That doesn't feel good. Don't touch me. You know, and so anger gives us the power to say no, to push, to kick, to you know, to do something when we're feeling powerless. And this all goes back to the fears and the vulnerabilities of the child. And so that's what's been internalized. That's the response. We want to clear the fear response so that we can get to the anger, which is authentic and it is appropriate. So we honor the anger. We don't say, no, you're not supposed to feel that way. Jacquelyn, you reminded me of a client I had. She had a very, very severe snake phobia. I mean, you couldn't even say the word snake. She couldn't write it down. She had to put S.E. And I had to play 20 questions to figure out what she was talking about. And so it took quite a while to get down to the root of the underlying fear that was generating this anxiety around snakes. But we cleared that, but she still had something else going on. And it was the unresolved anger that had been internalized was now generating another layer of fear. And when we tracked that down, exactly what had happened, her father, whenever she exhibited any signs of anger, he would send her to her room. So if she was, you know, if she was feeling vulnerable or afraid, he would shame her and send her to her room. And so she developed this layer of anger toward him, but also anger toward herself because she shouldn't be feeling that way. So now you've got fear and you've got anger, and it gets all tangled up in guilt and shame as well. So these are kind of the 4 bad guys that we carry around inside, and we need to clear them. But understanding how they stack up over time can be very helpful. You can't go after shame because shame's an after effect. You can't really go after guilt until you've dealt with the anger. You can't really go after the anger until you've dealt with the fear. So you got to clear those things completely and work your way through them very systematically. And just for those of you may have the question, what's the difference between guilt and shame? Guilt has to do with something, I did something wrong. And that's just conscience. Okay, I did something wrong. Recognizing that you did something wrong, that makes you forgivable. Okay, it's called repentance. I did something wrong. I admit it. I shouldn't have done that. Damn, you know. And so that's forgivable. You recognize that you did something, and so you can forgive yourself for that. Shame is a whole nother number. That shame is very toxic guilt, and that has to do with who I am. And that's put upon us. Children are born with guilt or fear. Okay, so shame is that there's something intrinsically wrong with me and it cannot be repaired. So that's a very tough nut to crack, but you got to get the other three first and then the shame will fall off. So coming back to my snake phobia client, these were all of the factors. This is what made her issue so complex and so challenging to deal with because it had so many layers. And if we had gone directly to the forgiveness work, we never would have resolved the phobia because there were so many things feeding into it. And in the end, it had nothing to do with snakes.
Yeah, which tends to be always the same, isn't it? And most of your hypnotherapists working on there.
Yeah, the snake in her life was a person.
Yeah.
And she had projected that onto snakes because this was someone in her family that she loved, and he tormented her in her entire life, and so she could not blame him. That would mean losing the love. And so what she did was she projected it onto snakes.
Yeah. Do you know, I'm going to bring up a topic now which could be to few of you watching a bit triggering. I want to talk about when we have a situation where we've been attacked physically, mentally, and sexually, and we're dealing with something that's very situational at the time. Although Wendie, we have discussed in the past about, even though that is happening now, we can trace it back to something in the past. But when it comes to working with someone, and I've had quite a few extreme things I've had to work with in my time, I'm sure many of you have, getting to the point where they are forgiving. I'm going to share this lady has passed away now. Her partner manipulated her. They went in for a walk to talk about their relationship, and he ended up what he thought murdering her, and he buried her alive. He put her in a makeshift grave. The police on the case happened to pick him up for drink driving, and he was very drunk and was bragging that he'd just killed his partner and left her. So of course they all went looking for this buried lady, and she had woke up in the morning and she talks about the seagulls here and coming around to the sound of the seagulls, realizing that she was somewhere miles away. She crawled, and the police did report they don't know how she got out of it because where she was, the grass was so high, and they didn't understand why she wasn't eaten by wild animals where she was, and she crawled out. And people who saw her thought she was a dying animal. She was that covered in blood. And she got to hospital, and she survived. She survived that attack. And she went on later on to actually drive a car off a cliff in sheer frustration, and she survived that. She's recently passed away. She's recently passed away suddenly by sudden death. And when I work very closely with this lady, and I got to work with the family as well, so it's quite upsetting for me as I'm talking about it now. But when we used to talk about forgiveness, it was like, I'm not going there, and it festered in her a lot. And when we've got a client like that, when we've got someone, I don't like to call it a client, a person like that, when we're working with that complex matters, those barriers that go up to forgiveness.
Yep.
It's understandable, isn't it?
Yeah. So if there's barriers to forgiveness, why introduce it?
Yeah.
It's too soon.
I didn't take it there, to be honest. So
It's too soon. Yeah, right. So, so now you have to identify, okay, so what is the nature of the block? The block is emotional. Okay. So what is the block? Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it guilt? Is it shame? Identify, or is it sadness? What emotion is getting in the way? In her case, it would be reasonable and rational to be afraid, especially if this individual is still walking around at large.
Well, he did go to prison. He did actually go to prison. During the case, he did actually try to attack the judge. It was very end, and there were threats coming back that when he came out, he was going to end a life.
Okay,
anyway.
so there's threats there, but the other thing to keep in mind, see, I'm a regression hypnotherapist, right? And so, if an adult comes to me and they've had that experience, the first thought that goes through my mind is, what were you doing with a guy like that?
He did have a lot of that with other counsellors, and when you come to me, he was done with being asked that question, because we were in this situation where it has happened.
Yeah. But that's not a question I would ever ask a client. That's the question I ask myself. Because what conditioned you to be attracted to someone who would behave in this way towards you? Okay, they didn't just get married and he tried to kill her that evening. Okay, that this had been building up over time. That we talk about red flags in relationships, right?
Yeah.
And so she just didn't see those flags. And so my question is, okay, what happened that you would be blindsided by, by those flags? Why did you not notice these things? And the answer for that is because they were normal to her. Because
there was a big history. And that in the end, I realized I was playing out that there was never going to be, in my opinion, a solution there, because there was always a lot of blame on everyone else. There was no, I can't explain. I don't want to speak ill on her because she's not with us any longer. But the fact was, there was diagnosis of cancer. There was abuse from him in the past, and it's almost like.
But the thing is that that event came out of her early life.
Yeah.
That's the connection you got to see, because whatever led up to her being attracted to that individual happened long before he was on the scene. And so that's where I want to resolve the underlying the vulnerabilities that she carried into that. I want to get her eyes open in the earlier events so that she can come back and actually see him for what he is. That's one of the key steps in the forgiveness process, is actually being able to look at that person that did you harm and realize, I picked you, or I put myself in this situation, or, or you just could not have behaved any differently because of who you are in this instance. Right.
I perhaps shouldn't have brought that up, because it was a very complex case I was working with, and the revelations were coming up as we were going through it. But it was almost like there was just a massive resistance to go anywhere really with it. So in the end, so it was just.
So that's why I say forgiveness is really the last step, because it should come easily. It shouldn't require any convincing whatsoever. It just becomes a natural byproduct. So if you get all of the pain and all of the anger and all of the guilt and the shame and the fear and all of that, you clear all those emotions, you can ask that person now, just in the privacy of their own mind, to look at that person that hurt them and ask them, how do you feel as you look at, hubby? Right? How do you feel as you look at dad? How do you feel as you look at your brother? And the person will say, I feel sorry for him. Boy, when you hit that, you've already got forgiveness. Now all you got to do is formalize it. Okay. When they say, I feel sad, and I say, okay, so what's behind that sad? What's the reason for that sadness? Well, I just think of all the years that we lost that could have been so much different, or I feel sad because, I love him. And if you find love, you found the forgiveness. Forgiveness and love are the same thing. Okay, so it's not saying what you did was okay by me. It's saying, no, you were wrong and it hurt me and I'm not carrying any pain anymore. And so
I'm free from it then.
And so I set myself free, as Daniel said, I forgive you and I set myself free.
Yeah.
So that I don't have to carry you around anymore in the privacy of my own mind.
Yeah.
So you're not renting out space in your own psychological, hotel room to this individual. They're not a part of your daily life anymore. Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
You know, I guess Tamsin has something, you know, to talk about when it comes to forgiveness, when it comes to veterans of war, because we're talking about parents, siblings, and stuff like that. How can you forgive an enemy, someone who killed a bunch of your friends, you know, co-patriot, what I call them, you know, you've been waging a war, you're there, and you've been living those traumas and more of that. It's been eating you inside and out. This is something.
I think what I've found working both with veterans and anyone else who's suffered significant trauma is that the first step, I mean, how can you understand? Well, first of all, I'll be very interested in anyone wants to write on here what their understanding of forgiveness is, because actually there can be lots of cultural differences, religious differences in our understanding of what is forgiveness? What do we mean when we say that? And for some, you know, it can come across as very potentially offensive, you know, like and dictatorial. You know, you must forgive, because a lot of people have belief systems in their faith that say this is what you've got to do. If someone is told to do that, they have to do it, it's a must, then you're going to get their back up. You know, they're not ready for it. Like Wendie says, there's so much of a process that has to be gone through first before someone can even consider that. And actually, forgiveness can hinder a therapy. You know, asking your client to consider forgiveness before they're ready can actually be very damaging to the therapeutic process, because kind of forgiveness is supposed to be bringing about closure. Well, there can't be closure if you're boiling away with rage and anger and all the rest of it. They're the repressed child that was never allowed to express their anger. But getting back to the veterans, etc., often I find that the point is that in all of the relationships around them as they've been growing up, anger has not been acceptable. Even Jackie said, oh, you know, we were banished, you know, we are not allowed to have anger, we banish it. And what happens is the child banishes their own anger. So they get dissociated from their own anger. So they're not allowed to express within themselves. And that angry part of them is still there and will often come out in incredibly destructive behaviors. So in extreme case, self-harming, because it's the only way that anger can be expressed. Because it's not being listened to, it's not being heard. So if we ask for forgiveness and closure too prematurely, it can actually be very damaging to the therapeutic process, actually. And there's more on that with people like Alice Miller, psychologist Wanda Malcolm. They've written quite a lot on that. It's very interesting stuff. So getting back to the veterans, quite often I find there's anger itself. That's the point. How can we understand forgiveness if we kind of define, well, what is forgiveness? What are we asking for then? So we need to be clear on that, because people, I can say, oh, I think you should forgive, and like my idea of forgiveness might be completely different to yours. You might have religious connotations, cultural
100%.
connotations, you know, personal connotations. So we need to get that clear. You know, what are we asking for? You know, what do we mean by forgiveness? And then realizing that how can we truly understand what it means to forgive or to consider forgiving? We're not imposing this on anyone. We're saying, you know, maybe perhaps consider it if we don't understand it ourselves. So like Wendie said, you know, she's been on the receiving end of both, you know, an internal journey, and hopefully this is the whole thing about the wounded healer. We've hopefully all been able to have a bit of introspection and work on ourselves. So you know, the starting point really needs to be, I think, you know, looking, once we've done all the steps that Wendie's talked about, which is critically important, you know, you can't just arrive at forgiveness. Not a second, not a moment before you're ready to, and there shouldn't be any must and you have to about it.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very personal journey, and it could take somebody 90 years. They could never get to a point where they feel like they can forgive. That's their journey. I don't feel that it should be imposed. When I'm working with people, I don't mention the word forgiveness, actually. Very, very, I don't think I have ever when working with a client, because as Wendie says, actually it can be a natural conclusion to a therapeutic journey. But we need to be clear on what we mean by it. And if we're meaning it's like a process you go through to change your feelings and attitudes regarding a given offender so that you can be free of it, then yes, it's completely about you, isn't it? Which is, you know, I'm not saying I'm unhealthy. It's your process that you're releasing yourself from lugging anger and resentment and bitterness and feelings of vengeance and all that, lugging it around in your heart and soul. And being free of that is obviously hugely therapeutic. I like the expression, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
There's something I'd like to interject here, if I may, and that is that you can be setting up for forgiveness very early in the process. And one suggestion I like to offer is you're allowed to forgive the past and set yourself free.
Yeah.
And that seeds in the person's mind, what would it like to be completely free? So I want to attach the idea of forgiveness to that complete freedom.
Yeah.
But if we get back to the, the origins of like when we say we're going to forgive someone, why are we needing to forgive them? Because they've committed a transgression against you. And then that's where the whole idea of justice came in. The ancient philosophers are saying, well, there needs to be a sense of fairness. How can a perpetrator get away with behaving exactly as they please and there's no consequences? So that's when we get the punishment. And basically justice, very broadly you could say, well, it's about giving somebody their just desserts. They've treated me like that, I want the eye for an eye thing. But as Gandhi pointed out, if you could continue that to the ultimate, an eye for an eye, the whole world goes blind. So it's a thorny one, and then there's certain crimes that can be committed where it's intentional, malicious, sadistic, whatever, where you think, well, is it possible to forgive for that? Even the ancient Hindu scholars were perplexed by this one. Like, well, there are certain crimes that perhaps remain unforgivable, rape and murder, right? So we have to consider where we are in our own journey as to whether we think, is it possible to forgive for those crimes, because they are perpetrated against someone with intention. There's a whole different ballgame, isn't it, between somebody who's harmed you unintentionally and someone who is deliberately perpetrating harm. And this is when Daniel was saying, what about veterans who are in a place of war and the whole group, the whole army is against another group, and they're all trying to kill each other. Like, so when someone comes along and then kills one of your colleagues, in that war zone, how do you feel about that? Ages ago, I was trying to say, a lot of this is about, with a client, working through their sense of their own guilt, their own anger against self. Survivor's guilt is a big one for veterans. They've watched their mates being blown up. Why am I still here? I should have gone down with them. And so you're actually working through forgiveness of self, which I think there's many facets to forgiveness. The idea
is. And to know, Wendy, you said something about experiencing forgiveness personally as a therapist. And we all know from ancient times that the real shamans of the tribe, they were scholars, and such. They were the ones that had gone through the trauma and come through the other end to that place of the adult and the balance. And I think that's really important, isn't it? And fully understanding it from an internal perspective.
All forgiveness is self-forgiveness.
Yeah.
We're not forgiving what they did.
Yeah.
We're not forgiving what they did. They could have killed all our buddies. We're not forgiving that. That was wrong. Okay. Yeah. If you've got a religious background, thou shalt not kill. It's wrong. The reason that we have military training is because it was discovered pretty early on that healthy human men will not go out and kill one another. They have to be desensitized through the training to do those sorts of things. Otherwise, the first time they cause harm to somebody, they buckle. They're not good soldiers. So they have to go through boot camp and have all that beat out of them. Yeah. So all forgiveness is self-forgiveness, and it can go back a long ways. I noticed that there was
there's some questions come in here.
There was one here. It says, how does an inner child own his or her part of how do you end up with abusive parents? That's a really good question, because the guilt that gets seeded, when you've got a guy that's been on the battlefield, and that survivor guilt, that's wrapped up with a whole bunch of stuff, and you've got to track that back to what actually programmed this person to take that on in the first place. And he says, how do you have an inner child own his part in having an abusive parent? You don't. You go back until you find the inner child that is innocent. The child is always innocent. You want to do the work with the innocent child. If you've got a client that's gone back and has an inner child that is blaming him or herself, you don't have the ISE. You don't have the causal event. Okay, you already have a wounded child. You've got to get back before that. You've got to find the point where the child didn't see it coming, didn't deserve it, could never have imagined anything like that ever happening. And in fact, one of the things that's often you'll find when you do a regression to cause with an abuse, whether it's physical or sexual abuse, the child will be confused by it. And confusion is really a good test for the ISE. If the child doesn't know how to make sense of what's happening, this is a new experience for the child. And so that's what I would look like if I'm working with someone in the military. I want to know what about this situation is familiar to you. Because you know that when the bullets are flying, that's not the first time they felt that feeling. And I don't want to do the work in that scene where the bullets are flying, because it's horrific, because there's so much compounded energetic emotional trauma already coming to the fore. I want to get back before any of that has happened and pull the plug out of it. I want to drain the energy out of the trauma so that I can bring them back and they can look at what's going on with neutral eyes. They can look at it just as the observer, and as they're observing that scene, notice what's left. What's left? What are the thoughts and the feelings that are coming up now? And that's where you're dealing with the adult portion of it. And that's where you can get the forgiveness. But you can't if you don't pull the plug out of all the stuff that fed into that in the first place.
Yeah,
And that's what sorry, over to you, Tams. I was just saying when we met up on John Dewar's course, and you would go in, you would kind of just started really working in depthly there, and it's something that you come to realization, didn't you, with that?
Yeah, I mean,
and it's so complex.
And you know, completely. It explains why two soldiers going into the same experience, one can go pop with PTSD and the other one manages to deal with it in a different way. It's because the soldier that's gone pop is already at full capacity of trauma from, you know, their childhood. I mean, like every veteran I work with, there'll be ICEs. So it's digging through that lot, as Wendie says, in order to understand why they've arrived at this point where they've just gone, no more, no, that's it, I can't deal with anymore.
Yeah, their cup is full.
Pressure cooker. Yeah, the pressure cooker
exploded. Yeah, yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, and now something. Yeah, the valve has just popped right off the pressure cooker. Yeah. So we don't want to work with that much pressure because it's re-traumatizing. Yeah. So we want to get back before they ever felt that kind of intensity, understanding that it's all leading up to this, but we want to get before it. And the cool thing about doing that is that they know it's coming. They know that it happened. We're not denying anything. We're saying, yeah, it happened. And when we get before it, they know it's coming. But if we can drain off the emotional pressure and get some insight before we take them back into that scene, it can be very transformative.
By the way, you know, pressure can build up after whatever happened. So it's the client or the patient, or whatever you call that person's own responsibility to know how to release that pressure whenever it builds up, because that building up is like a pattern that has, you know, continued. You have pulled the plug, you have, you know, released the biggest trauma out of it, but somehow they have built up some sort of a mechanism, but they don't know how to release it. So sometimes we give them some sort of a technique. It could be tapping or anything else, or you just like a maintenance kind of like every once in a while just talk to them. Sometimes they are a bit shy to call back or something like that to follow up. So the follow up is not even to be shied away from. It's not something that is like sinful. You don't call your client or something like that, because those people, they had so many ways. Let's put, you have one origin for every single thing. You have pulled the plug on the ISE, but some things may be just hiding, and like I call them like fallen leaves, you know, from a tree. Every day leaves, they fall, and some things they can just build up and build up and build up. They have, you know, built some sort of system or a trend to keep that pressure cooker blocked, because this is the way they express, or they self-preserve or protect themselves. They might end up using the same technique of putting that inside. So they might be oppressed or, malignant, whatever it is, just like somebody, like when in defamation, or somebody's talking to them, or somebody has done something wrong to them, and then they just like brush it under the rug and then go on with their lives. So it's some sort of a trend. It's their personality, it's their character. So it is in their own hand not to let that pressure cooker build up again. So you have emptied that pressure cooker. But then the pressure cooker, you're going through life again.
So I think Tamsin would agree that teaching clients self-regulation when they've got a lot of trauma, in that pressure cooker, teaching them self-regulation before you start, taking the lid off is a really important part of the therapeutic process.
There can be a huge amount of therapeutic work to do before. I don't use the term forgiveness when I'm talking with people, because I think it can be very loaded with
anger,
religious connotations, and how offensive to say to somebody, well, you need to forgive that rapist, or you need to, if they're still completely in the anger and the hurt and the pain, and the fact that, as I think Kate's pointing out on her messages here, someone is doing something intentionally to harm you. That's a very difficult one. If you go along and go, well, you need to forgive that person, you could expect the smack in the mouth almost. It's kind of like, it can be really offensive, and understandably so. I think, well, Daniel was talking about this person, they haven't learned the tools as to how to release stuff or whatever, and it's kind of like their personality. I would say it's more the impact of the messages that have been given to them since a small child, because like Wendie said, if you strip right back to the innocent child, even if you have to go right back to the womb, if we're going into regressions, like that child wasn't born with shame and guilt and self-loathing and anger. And this is the point: if they have no self-worth because they've been taught they are worthless, they are not going to know how to take good care of themselves, because they don't deserve to take good care of themselves, because they're worthless, they're useless, they're stupid, all these things that have been shamed with. So how are they going to take good care of themselves when therapists say, well, I just need you to learn these techniques that are going to help you regulate? They don't know how to look after themselves, because it's never been a thing. It's, like, they're worthless.
This is why you need to check on them from once in a while, just to tell them, I'm here.
One of the things that you can do is take that soldier from the battlefield and take them back to before they ever knew what it was like to feel scared or angry or hurt or sad in any way. Take them back to the innocence of a child they once were. And sometimes you got to go all the way back to the womb before they can actually find that place where they felt safe and secure and worthy of love. That's what you want to find. Find that point. Then bring the adult into the scene and ask them to look at that little one, and ask that adult, is that little baby there, that little one inside mom, is he worthy of love? Does he deserve to feel safe and secure in the world? You need to get that agreement from the client that the child is innocent, the child deserves to be loved. If you had that little child, if that little child was your son or your nephew or your grandchild, could you love that little boy? Of course. Great. Imagine what it would be like to just take him in your arms right now and look into his eyes. I want to ask you a question. Is there anything inside of him that could have prepared him for that scene on the battlefield? That's the moment. That's the moment. See, you've joined the infant to the adult in a loving way. And now you've asked the adult to do what we call hypnoanalysis. We've asked him to make an assessment. Was there anything that could have prepared me coming into this life for that horrible situation that I'm trying to heal now? And the answer, of course, is no. So we're going to change that now. And so the grown-up can actually prepare the child. This is what we do. We go before the ISE and we prepare the child. You can do it right there in the womb. And you can say, some bad stuff's going to happen growing up. That's life. It happens to everybody. But here's what the child doesn't know, and he needs to know. You're going to get through it. You're going to survive.
You know, there's a part of the child where there's a real child here. You know, when it comes to a real child that has been seeing bad things in the family, and how do you deal with that, and how do you put that child on the bench and tell them, you know, it's not what your daddy or your mommy did is, you know, like, they're not bad. It's what they did is bad. And how do you just give them that way in kind of role playing, and you're using but like puppets or something like that. You know, you can let them release that, talk it, just like the way we do it usually with like gestalt techniques like chair therapy or part therapy or whatever it is. You can put that child and let them role play, because those children are way before whatever you know, was formed, you know, theoretically speaking, as critical faculty or whatever it is. But basically they have a vivid imagination, and then this is why it is building up, so you can catch up with whatever happened. But whatever you need to do when it comes to that child, in my opinion, is never put them in the what are called and the witness kind of bench, you know, just like sometimes the parents, they put that child in the middle, and then this parent will tell that child that the parent is not good, and the other parent will tell that child that the other parent is not good. So the child will see that guilt, you know, if everything happened after I was born. So this is usually what happens in the inner child with the adults. So basically that child, 6, 7, 5, 4, it doesn't matter, you know, my parents loved each other, that's why they got married. And then now that I'm here and I'm aware, I can see they're fighting. So it's due to me. I'm the problem. So they need to be given that kind of forgiveness and tell them it's not your fault. And then you shouldn't be expecting things from the others to change. They are the way they are. Whatever you need to do is just like you don't accept what is being done to you, and you just don't expect them to change. This is it's a short and long process at the same time when it comes to the parent's responsibility and the child, the same way as it goes with the inner child when it is being addressed in the clinic or in the office with an adult. So it's not a tricky part, but it's a role play. It's usually a role play when technically speaking. But I gave just here an analogy. You know, the pen, called the pen or the pain. You know, if you have a pen and with you have long nails, let's say, and you holding to that pen is like 10 grams or something. You know, it's not that heavy. So you're holding it, putting your hand ahead, and you just, you know, like making a fist on that pen and hanging on to that pen. Believe me, after 10 minutes, you will have a shoulder, you know, like locked, and your fingernails will go inside your hand and start having more pain. And this is not the pen itself that is causing the pain. It's you holding on to that pen. So this is a way just to release the pen and release yourself from pain. So it's a powerful analogy, especially when you end up not knowing what to tell them about forgiveness. Just give them a 3D kind of representation about what forgiveness is, just like that letting go. I'm not letting go your pen. It's your pen. You let your pen go.
Yeah. Do you want to bring up here something, Danielle? Sorry, Danielle, we didn't get into your comment. Danielle is a mental health nurse and has been for a number of years. And from where honestly, it's very interesting because Danielle is a hypnotherapist as well. And it's like working with the people that you do, Dan, it must be so frustrating to know there could be a solution there for the people you work with.
To myself, yeah. So I work with offenders in a mental health hospital. So they come to us at the point of crisis, really, when they've committed quite serious offences. And I kind of fell into this job when I qualified, which was really bizarre because I didn't choose to work in forensics. But I don't know, life has a funny way of throwing things at you sometimes. And it was interesting. working with offenders who had committed some quite horrific crimes and also been through some life experience as people have done, and you get to learn a different perspective of working with these people, because you get an understanding of their childhoods and where they've come from and what's led to the offending behaviour, and you don't justify what they've done, but you kind of build up a story, a holistic picture of that person, what's led up to that crisis point, really, which is it's a really interesting perspective from my point of view to listening to this conversation tonight.
Danielle, I really appreciate you saying that. I was for my sins, I was in the police for quite a while, and I always tell the story of a lad that was I had the pleasure of dealing with for about 10 years. So I watched him grow up. So from 5-year-old to 15. So 15-year-old was out robbing and stealing and attacking other youths and really starting to engage in some really unpleasant behaviour, and even to the extent of robbing old ladies and that kind of stuff. So if you haul that 15-year-old youth to the youth court, and you get, say, everyone in this room, everyone around as a community to say, look at that despicable kid, what he's doing, he's attacked that old lady, and you'll have a set of opinions or judgments about that 15-year-old, 25-year-old. But I've watched this lad since he was 5, and so I also know right back to then his history of being bullied at school because he smelt of feces, because he was incontinent because of his father's abuse. And we're looking to reach to that 5-year-old kid and say, well, if you presented that 5-year-old to court and said, this is what's been going on to me, what would everyone in this room make of him then? How would you see and view him differently as a 5-year-old child that has had to go through the things that he's gone through? And so I think this is where we start to gain an insight into the reasons behind. It doesn't excuse someone's behaviour.
No,
this is not an excuse. It's to understand and hold compassion for the reasons behind it. But is that explanation going to help the person who is very much still within their anger and their resentment and their desire for vengeance, and you're saying, well, actually what I want you to understand is that only hurting people hurt others. Okay, so we have to go back, as Wendie keeps saying, let's go back all these layers and find out for when your abusive father, who so horrendously abused you, was 5 and had terrible things happen to him. No, you're taking that person away from their own journey of being able to stand up as the child that was never allowed to express anger, and you're saying, let's work with that. Let's listen to this child who is so
interestingly, sorry to butt in, I have been involved in a couple of people who have been in part of the restorative justice process as well, which has been interesting from my perspective, because you're then watching that person who's committed those crimes listen to the victims and how it's affected them, and then they're kind of like dealing with all the shame and the guilt and the anger of all the things they've done to that person. So yeah,
I think that's when we start to, as I say, let's define forgiveness here. This is when forgiveness as a process starts to involve both parties, because we know that there are some schools of thought and some religions that believe that you can forgive regardless, and it doesn't matter whether the other person even knows. I mean, you can forgive someone who's died, it's your choice. So it's about you. It's about you taking ownership of not lugging around things you don't want to lug around anymore, and you're releasing yourself, which is why it's so powerful as a healing modality. But when we start to look at where there's restorative justice programs, yes, you are bringing the offender and the victim together, with the perpetrator's sense of guilt and shame and genuine remorse, and it's an atonement for them. It's really, so therefore the person who's then doing the forgiving is offering something that's very powerful in the healing journey of that perpetrator. But can you offer that if the perpetrator is completely unrepentant, completely, how does that work? So this is where you can say there's like, there's various levels of forgiveness. Yes, it can be a process that's just for you. You can take ownership of it and say, I'm doing this for me. I don't want to love these feelings around anymore. But actually, if you have someone who sincerely is wanting to atone, and because it is a process you're then offering them as well, because it helps them to release guilt and shame. Because they're carrying that load. That's why restorative justice can be so powerful as an intervention, rather than slinging them in prison. You'll find that when I was doing the restorative justice program where I worked, any offenders that had gone through RJ as opposed to prison had a massively decreased chance of reoffending. Decreased, yeah.
Yeah, I'll agree.
Reoffending. So it's very effective, but it relies on the offender having a sincere sense of remorse,
yeah.
And the forgiveness of the person they've harmed is because they are able to say, I am so sorry I've done that to you. I recognize now the hurt I've caused and the pain I've caused, and I feel terrible about it, and is there anything I can do to atone for that? Which is where justice, when we come back originally, was like, in a fair society, should people be allowed to get away with anything they please and cause harm to others without any punishment? That's where the whole idea of justice came in the first place. And so when that person's saying, look, please, is there anything I can do to help? And then that person says, well, actually, because that's allowing them to kind of work off their debt of guilt. Like, they're saying, let me do this because I it's a release for me to be able to. So that's about the offender. Like, but that dynamic is not possible between offender and victim if either one of those is still really angry, which is where we get back to Wendie's point, which is there are so many steps to go through before we get anywhere near forgiveness. I've worked with one person for 2 years, and we've only just approaching a sense of forgiveness of self, of the angry child that was doing self-harming behaviors because I thought it was their fault. They deserved it.
I think it's important that you make a distinction between justice and forgiveness. They're not the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Forgiveness does not absolve a person of the crime. If they committed a crime, that needs to be admitted to. And remorse is from so you've got the victim and then you've got the perpetrator. The perpetrator needs to come to a place of remorse, and the victim needs to come to a place of empowerment. And those things usually coincide. That's the fertile ground for forgiveness to occur. When you're working with perpetrators, it's a different angle. Okay. The whole idea of them being able to actually face the pain that they have perpetrated on others, if they can identify with that and have compassion for the victims, then the door is now opening for self-forgiveness. And that's really the root. We want to find the compassion. But it's really all forgiveness is self-forgiveness. An individual who has been a perpetrator, if they come to a place of self-healing and forgive themselves of the past, but take ownership for the damage that they did, if they come to that place of remorse and find forgiveness, they will not reoffend. They can't, because they know the pain that it caused them in the past. So that's where you get authentic forgiveness. But let's be clear, there's head forgiveness and there's heart forgiveness. Head forgiveness comes up with all the reasons why you should forgive. Head forgiveness tells you, they were just, doing their thing, or, they had a bad childhood, and coming up with reasons that, this is not real. Authentic forgiveness comes from the heart. And that's where you're no longer carrying any emotional charge whatsoever. You don't fear that individual. You don't have any anger towards them. You might feel sad for them, but generally speaking, you are neutral. If the person is an ongoing threat, you have enough sensibility to stay clear of them.
Yeah.
Okay. That's just
brought that up there. So I can see Daniel with his hand up.
Yeah, and I wanted to say something just quick on the it's like a mathematical thing. I always tell them, you stop being f of x, the function of x, f of x equal. So stop being the function of that person. Every place, every space, every time, every smell, every song, every anything will make you just glitch. So once you stop being F of X, then you're free. You know, then you're F, then you're free. You know, let's not go into the words anyway.
I like that.
Jack.
That's
I think,
nice.
Daniel, that's a brilliant way of putting it. I think the idea that forgiveness gives, I don't like the word victim either, you know, but it gives somebody power back. Like, I am powerful. I am choosing.
You know, if you gave the word victim, you gave the label victim, you will let them go away with no responsibility whatsoever. So being a victim, it means like, I'm a victim. No, you're responsible for your own freedom. You're not a victim anymore. You think you were a victim. Now you're not a victim. Now you're responsible for what you're gonna do. So basically, when you tell someone you're a victim, it means, oh yeah, okay, it's nothing I had to do with it, and it's not my, so they have to work it out. They have to change. Yeah, but you have no power over them. You only have power over yourself. And it's me and you in here. I don't have a third party in here. The only thing I have to can work with, I can guide you. I will not lead you. I will guide you, and you will do that thing. But you're not a victim anymore. So this is why I kindly don't like. Let's put it on the lower level. Don't like the word like victims of narcissism or narcissistic victims or something. You know, when it comes to rape victim or something like that. So when people they stay in the victimhood, it's like they won't take responsibility to free themselves for what has happened to them. They can go there and sit in the fetal position under the shower their whole life and say like, my mother hated me or my father hated me, I'm a victim of a perpetrator or something like that, but they will not move on.
They're trapped.
So once they go out from the victimhood label, they will be like, you're victorious, you're champ, it's like, if you go on being a victim, you know, my coach doesn't like me, my boss doesn't like me. They go into that, you know, why it always happens to me, you know, then the transactional analysis kind of aspect, you know, why it's always happening to me. So it's, but you're not a victim anymore. Once you step inside, you go through that process, you have to accept, first thing, you're not a victim anymore. You're a warrior, you're a fighter. You will go through that.
So we're talking about identity here.
Yeah.
The victim is an identity, and that's an individual who's trapped in the fears and insecurities of a child. So you got to heal that child.
Yeah.
Because
if they see themselves as a victim,
100%.
it's because they're still stuck in an event that caused them to feel powerless and incapable of taking action to move forward with their life. So you got to heal that.
And you know, with that as well, I would say that when we're in that trap phase, and it again, depending on what's happened to them in their lives and what's been going on around them, it's like that confusion, or we call it, they've been gaslit so much that they don't even know which way to go. If I go that way, will I get pulled back? Will I get hurt? Will I go that way? And it's like, oh my God, I just don't know where to go from here.
You know, because a child has two states, and two states only: submissive or rebellious. So, which one do you want to be? Do you want to stay a child, submissive or rebellious, or you want to raise up to be an adult and take care of your own self? So, as Jordan Peterson would say, you know, like, make your own room.
Yeah.
So, like,
Philip has just said, because I actually know Philippa quite well, and she said, my son's father is unrepentant for all his abuse towards me. However, I've had the ability to be able to forgive him, and it was very freeing for me. Again, I know Philippa personally, and she's what I'd like. If you could put a person to emotional intelligence, this would be Philippa Holden, because you have had the perfect example through your life, haven't you, of how you could have remained in victimhood state, but you made a lot of choices, didn't you? A lot of bold choices to be where you are right now. And Philip, I don't want to mute yourself and tell people what it is for the project you're involved in at the moment, which has kind of led you to excelling in what you do right now.
Which project are you speaking of?
The teen cancer that you're working with.
So it's a project actually that I've just completed. So it began in February of this year. And originally it was to go in and support the learning and development of 170 staff. However, as soon as I entered that environment, it was very, very clear. And as we perhaps know, in the charity sector especially, you know, burnout is something sort of like that happens very, very quickly for people. However, having the ability to be able to like address it, etc., is something totally different. So I set about sort of like putting some really like key things in place to help them actually sort of like recognize, okay, am I in burnout? Am I in my cycle, etc. But more importantly, and something that I feel really proud of, is that I brought breathwork circles to the Cancer Trust, and I helped all of the nurses as well that go into the wards that Teenage Cancer Trust actually sort of like support, to be able to be a significant point of contact for young people that have either like been diagnosed with cancer, going through treatment or recovering, and actually sort of like in that process of rebuilding their life after cancer. A journey that I've completed 3 times in my own life. But to be able to actually sort of like instill and teach them a really small yet effective skill set that they can utilize themselves, but also with these young people that they're supporting with. And sometimes, you know, it can be really intense, as we know, but to be able to offer that space, but also an effective like way to help them breathe through the emotional surfboard that they're going through, for me, especially for this year, has been a really, really sort of like important piece of work that I wasn't necessarily initially brought on board for, but I pushed through it, and I created the door and opened it. And so now, you know, they are equipped in a way to be able to help through that emotional journey at this moment in time. And I've also like built a relationship where I'm able to like go back in and help them in various other sort of like different ways. But it's important to okay, what is it that I'm trying to sort of like say here? I think from my own experience of going sort of like through various different things through like my childhood, etc., I came to a place very, very early on. What if the person that has done X, Y, and Z is unrepentant for what it is perhaps that they've done towards me? What if I'm unable to actually access the answers that would help me move forward? And it's from that place that I was like, okay, maybe they're unable to actually express why they've done it or the reasons, etc. But should I then hold to that space and be unable to move forward? No. For me personally, okay, it was like, okay, how do I take myself through this journey to heal and to be able to forgive and wish them well and wish them their own healing? And that is very much a place of where I operate from. So I hope that that's given you a little bit of an insight into me, but also like the importance, you know, like of all of our work that we do, and sometimes knowing that, you know, we may be sort of like asked to do particular like things in the initial space, but it's having the intuition and like the discernment to like know that maybe you've been brought there for a slightly different purpose, and to recognize it and to own it and fulfill it.
You know,
And
some people will not be able to grasp the thing that will wish them well. Sometimes they are so, you know, going into okay, I'm not going to wish them well. This is sometimes they stand there and feel they have given so much by releasing, and it's like, so this is, you know, some people, if you have reached that level, that's like hip 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 hooray, you know. But you know, some of the practitioners will go and said like, wish them well. Said, oh no, I'm not gonna wish them well. So, you know, especially when it comes to these kind of things, it's just like,
Yeah, Daniel, I think that's, you know, where I would say, you know, proceed with great caution if you're trying to encourage someone to forgive. You know, I don't use that term with people. doing the work to release any feelings of rage, guilt, shame, hurt, pain, all the rest of it. Well, just call it that.
We will use our friends Scott Arton's new term, releaseness.
Yeah, I mean,
when does Scott come up with that the other day?
Yesterday was it?
Yesterday was yesterday.
It's like he came up with that term. Like I'm going to use releaseness from now on. So, it's a long debate about whether it's a releaseness or a forgiveness or whatever it is, but basically when it comes to that term, really, as Tamsin is saying, when you say forgiveness, it's like, haven't I given enough? I have given my body, I have given my child, I have given myself. Look at me, I'm missing an arm and a leg. Those people killed my mother in front of me. They just slayed my child in front of me. I come from a country where those things, they just happened in front of people. They have like mass massacres and stuff like that. So how can you ask someone to just forgive? So you have to educate them on how beneficial it is for you, those people. It's like, especially when it comes to not only one person, you have like mass hate. It's like one person that is hating a whole religion or a whole faction or a whole affiliation or a whole political party. It's like, I'm not going to just like put them and give you a list and then go on forgive them. But one part of this, like Steve Parker used to use some way to for forgiveness or for releasing releaseness. So I'm gonna market that term now. So Steve Parker used to say like, just imagine, see, or like make believe, whatever, all those faces, names, all those people, just like put them in front of you and forgive them one after the other. Sometimes when I do that, they will, after the session, they'll say like, I've seen people, they came to my mind, I thought I forgot about them, but I just sent them away. So they have reached a certain point in maturity, in knowing how beneficial is for them. They didn't stop at that level and they said like, oops, that guy, I'm gonna just sit there and talk to him. No, they just like, because they know the system, how it is working now. I released, my father, I released my mother, I released my rapist, I released everybody, and it's so beneficial. I released the first person, hell, like my neck is better. I released the second, my shoulders are much better. I released even, I'm breathing even better. Here we go, I'm gonna release everyone, so I'm much better. So it's like, yeah, it's so beneficial even on physical level. So when they come out of this session, they're just like puffy eyes, crying like hell, but they have a huge smile and just like free limb, like they're just like jumping. You look at the face and you say like, the hell, they need someone to carry them home, but they go on dancing. So it's like, yeah, it's quite contradictory, but it's so beneficial. This is why I said, when a parent is forgiving the other parent, it should be passed to the child. It should be taught to that child how beneficial it is when you just let them out of your heart and let them out of your mind at the same time. Just like, don't overthink things, and at the same time it's so beneficial for you. You'll go to school much better, you'll be happier, you'll not hold that burden on your shoulders anymore, and you don't feel guilt. It's not about you.
But as you say, like, forgiveness is one of the final stages of the process, and there's many stages that lead up to that. And again, it comes from a real sense of peace within when we are indifferent. Hi, Bob.
Hello, Bob.
He's gone. Yeah, when we are generally indifferent, and then we finally have dropped it like that, gone.
Indifference is some sort of a denial.
Yeah, as okay, that where in the process are you then? Because like Daniel was saying about basically the body keeps the score. You can't deceive the body knows exactly. So Daniel's made a point on the comments, it's a defense mechanism holding on to forgiveness, talking from a personal perspective. And I think you'll find there that it's likely that if you get in touch on a bodily level to find out how you're feeling about the idea of forgiveness, you'll find there's still more work to do. because this idea of it being a defense mechanism, that's very interesting. You know, when I was saying about be careful when you're working with somebody as to what you're asking of them about the forgiveness, because actually Daniel's identified something really important. If you're using it as a defense mechanism to perhaps shield yourself from feeling the reality of what actually happened.
Do you mean holding on to the resentment?
Well, she's saying holding on to forgiveness.
It's a defense mechanism, holding on to forgiveness. Sorry, I'm a bit slow tonight. Can you explain that, Daniel? Sorry.
You mean unforgiveness, yes?
Unforgiveness.
Holding on to unforgiveness. In
Well, she
other
might be
words, holding
meaning-
on to the grievance, holding on to the
Yeah.
pain, holding on
sorry,
to
I
the
thought you
resentment.
meant
I think
Yeah.
I don't
saying
know.
that
Who's
forgiving
Daniel?
someone is a defense mechanism. I was like, well, I don't.
no,
Sorry,
Yeah.
it was like holding on to it for fear of being re-traumatized, essentially.
It's a protection,
Holding on
Yeah.
to what, Danielle?
not forgiving, not letting
Yeah.
go.
To not forgive people. Okay, because I just thought that was actually interesting what you've put there about holding on to forgiveness. It, you know, because for some people it's an intellectualized. I know that's now you've explained. Thank you. That's not what you meant, but it's an interesting point, because some people hold on to it as an intellectualization of their experience, like either the Bible tells me I must forgive, or my religion tells
Right.
me, or people,
Head
society
forgiveness.
tells me.
So
And
where's
so
the feeling? Yeah. Okay.
intellectually, just as Wendie said, my head says, you know, oh, I must forgive, but your heart is saying, hello, not okay.
I went to see a therapist many years ago, and she described me as having like a fortress built around myself. That's how she described how I was at that time, and that was my defense mechanism.
Yeah,
hold
holding
on.
It's like
the
some
resentment.
would think that. Sorry.
No, I was just saying to Daniel, she's saying that was her shield was to actually hold on to
Yeah.
all the anger and resentment. Okay, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
And
feels-
so,
it feels
and
like
so,
if you let go of that thing, you know, you've forgiven that person, you'll be re-traumatized again. So basically, you're using that in order to just block everything. So by doing that, it's like as if you're not. I'm not going to feel anymore. I'm not going to go there anymore. I'm not going to lower my guards anymore. So from now on, this is me and this is that wall I built. Even if you
Yeah.
broke that wall, you have to run through the river of crocodiles to get to me. So by that, it's like you're shielding yourself from the outer world, but yet you're shielding yourself from your own self. So it's like that inner child is so deeply buried back, and you will not be able to reach it. So to the subconscious mind, it's a like a defense mechanism, because it's self-preserving. And that moment in time when you say like, okay, I'm going to let go of that self-preserving mechanism, the subconscious mind will say like, yeah, what are you going to give me instead? Is it drugs?
the wall is a response to being hurt by someone you loved. That's what the wall is. And it's to ensure that you can't get hurt again. So it's usually a parent, okay? Someone that you needed love from, someone that you needed to be close to, who wasn't safe to be loved by or to be close to. So, you know, sometimes the person that you know, that's supposed to be caring for us is the person that's doing us harm. Either, you know, sometimes they're doing it unconsciously, but for whatever the reason, the wall is there for a reason, and it's a good thing. So the first thing we want to do is we want to say, you did the right thing. You built that wall to keep her safe. That little one trapped inside needed somebody to look after her, and you figured out how to do that. You built that wall. The problem with the wall is that while it keeps you safe, it keeps you from really being able to feel love, because you can't ever get close to anybody ever again. So this is the work that I want to do, would be to grow up the child so that the wall isn't needed anymore. Because now as an adult, you don't need a wall. You can defend yourself. You can look after yourself. As a child, you didn't have that. So the wall was necessary, but the grown-up doesn't need a wall. The grown-up can knock that thing down and say, what do you got that can get past this? And you know, but we need to clear out, you know, we got to get the alligators out of the swamp before we start draining it.
Yeah.
So the wall is a good thing. It's there for a reason. Never take somebody's walls down.
Do you know
What you
what?
want
I
to
had to
do is create
explain
a
this.
situation where they don't need the wall anymore, and then they can take it down.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about having understanding that pain is a message, anger is a message. Yeah. Well, what has not been able to be expressed, what has not been heard. So just saying, oh, let's just release your anger, as I said in the last thing with the meeting we had, just saying, oh, yes, let's learn techniques to release someone's anger, take it away. Well, actually, no, that's not going to go away until the subconscious message behind the anger or the pain or the hurt is actually being listened to, and actually had listened to without judgment and with compassion, to understand what the child was never safe to express.
Right, and anger is a feeling that doesn't get a voice when you're a child.
That's right.
It doesn't get a
It's safe to
voice.
express it.
Yeah, unless you happen to be one of those kids that throws tantrums. And so now you know that that's a lot of pent up anger that's just coming out without any restraints.
But then you see that's not then acceptable. It's then not socially acceptable to throw a tantrum. So then the message from the child, the wounded child, underneath, that's obviously behind anger, there's hurt. The hurt underneath it all, the message to that child is your anger is not wanted, it's not tolerated, it's not acceptable. And when you try and express it, it becomes even more not tolerated and not acceptable. So
what the child does, because the younger the child is, the more egocentric they are. Okay. And so if the child throws a tantrum because it doesn't have the ability to control its own feelings. Okay. So there's all this frustration and all of this, this pent up emotion. They don't know how to deal with it. And so this is the only way they know how to get it out. And what happens? They get penalized for that. And what does the child do? There's something wrong with me. I'm the problem. I'm bad. Okay. It never gets identified that there's something wrong with the feeling. They don't get that right away. That comes later. But the first message that comes in is there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And of course, they have lots of logical verification for that because they feel so out of control. And so feeling out of control then becomes a very scary thing. And so this generates anxiety. So you can have an underlying anxiety that finds expression through rage. So, and you probably know this, anybody that's in psychotherapy, that anxiety and depression go side by each, right? But depression is really just unexpressed anger. So anxiety is one side of the scale, and the other side is all the bottled up anger. So you find a way out for that, and the depression will dissipate.
I mentioned something here, about the fortress that Danielle was talking about. It's like you build yourself your own prison. Alcatraz was some sort of a fort anyway. It's like it was a prison. So in order to shield yourself, you build yourself a prison, and you imprisoned yourself for a crime you didn't commit. So basically, if you have committed that crime, and that crime is like it will get the ultimate sentence. It will like 15, 20, 25 years. So basically, you have overstayed your welcome at that prison. It's about time to leave. It's just like open that door. You build it. You have the own keys. You open that door and you just like leave. It's in your hand. It's your own prison. It's not actually, it's your own fortress. But if I stay inside the fortress for my whole life, it means I have sentenced myself to a crime I didn't commit. So those people around you, they are just running around in the whole world. You're shielding yourself from them, but they are free and you're not. So this is the difference. So it's better to put them in that prison, keep them away from your own mind, and go run free in the whole world outside. Your whole world is your own playground. So this is another perspective. Is just like flip it, just turn that thing around and just like get out of there. Otherwise, there's no benefit from staying there.
Do you know when you're saying that, when you're dealing with so much complex issues, though, that, as you've just said, times that fortress, it's scary to leave, because some people have every aspect in their life is so negative and so fearful that they say, I'm trying to not swear.
That's why the forgiveness is the last step.
So it's this process. That's what I'm saying. It's a process to say, I can open the door. Can I open the door and look at that light? Can I?
That's why it's the last step. When you are done with that, you open that door and leave. So you forgive yourself, you forgive all the others, and then you
Yeah.
just step out. Tamsin.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you know, talking about the people I've worked with who've suffered extreme abuse, you know, they're not going to be able to have any clue about how to, not just how to free themselves from that prison, but that there's any need to, because they don't deserve
That's true.
anything
Yeah.
better. And actually, promises of things better can be very, very scary to a very abused child. So if the therapist comes in and is nice to that abused child, nice has not been a good thing in the experience of that child. So, you know, your good intentions can be met with a, you know, a really frightened response from the child, the inner child that you're working with, because it's not been okay to, you know, when adults promise something nice is going to happen, it's not nice, right? So but then there's this whole sense of not being worthy, don't deserve, there's no self-esteem, there's no self-worth. So then why would they get themselves out of that prison? Because they deserve to be there. And this is when I find severely abused and working with inner children of clients that are severely abused, is that it is them themselves that are doing the self-harming. They are attacking self, because they, you know, self needs to be dead, basically.
Yeah.
You know, is that extreme? And so
this
you're
is where you
saying,
got to go back and find the child that is
Child,
worthy
yeah,
of
that
love,
part.
and this
that
is
is
what I'm saying,
worthy of, worthy of being cared for and being loved and being kept safe. When you find the worthy child, now you can bring that remembrance back up to the wounded child.
Yeah.
And you can
And in
say to
some
that
cases,
wounded,
going back to the
remember,
blue.
it wasn't always like this.
Mm.
Wasn't always like this. There was a time when you deserved to feel good, and you can integrate that into the experience of that wounding.
So, you know, I'm just saying, bearing in mind that for some people this can be a very, very delicate process that can take time. And I know there's a big thing at the moment and in the therapy world that we do blitz
One
everything
session.
and one session wonders and all that, you know, and actually it can be an incredibly
Sorry.
complex process, and there can be
I catch a lot of flack over that one, because I
yeah.
say this is not a
We have-
one-session fix.
we have
You work with where the client's at. It takes as long as it takes, because it isn't up to you, it's up to the client.
that's right. And I
We-
always say
we need volume 3 on that, you know.
that all my
Do you know,
clients,
as I'm listening to us four chatting away tonight, and I can see you all looking, do you know what is really obvious to me is that this is complex.
Yeah.
And as we said,
No, it's not. Healing
no,
isn't
listen, sorry.
complicated.
Hear me out on
People
this.
are complicated.
Yeah, hear me out on this. So what I'm saying, it sounds a complex process, sorry, but it really isn't. And when you're shown, I mean, I remember Beryl standing, you really got to meet Wendie Webber and do a training. And it's almost like as soon as you do it, and I'm sorry, I'm not selling anything here, it goes boom, boom, boom. The penny just drops down and down and down. It's like,
Mhm.
why do we complicate it then?
Yeah,
Doing all these one, this is not disrespecting anyone's protocols, but doing all this when in reality we've got
complexity.
this structure. And sometimes you'll have your client, it goes text perfect, doesn't it? Boom, 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 like that. Wow, that was brilliant. Then sometimes you do have the offshoots, but it's your training that comes into it, isn't it? And of course, your clients teach you as well. And it's your inner creativity that comes with experience when you're working. This is what I personally have found anyway. It's
But you
about
have to-
knowing when you want to zig the zag, and it's knowing what to do in that moment or how to deal with it in that moment. And as I'm
It requires
listening to
patience, because it's not about you, it's about them. That's the
exactly.
thing,
And as
you
I'm
know.
listening to us all talking, I'm looking at all your faces above and thinking, you know, going back when I first trained, it's like I remembered, yeah. So I hope you've all any questions, anyone, anyway, because we've literally gone off on a lot of different topics there, to be honest. But any question, I'm looking at the thing. Philip Holden is like, whoa, I love that analogy, Daniel. You have imprisoned yourself for a crime you didn't commit. Hallelujah. Yes. Yes, right. What else have we got here? Daniel's saying, I built a prison to keep me safe. Alcatraz was a fort and all emotions are required for the good, but the road to hell is filled with good intentions. And you have imprisoned yourself for a crime you didn't commit, and it's time to leave that prison. Yes.
You know, it's as Wendie was saying, it's simple, yet it's complex, but it's simplified complexity because it requires patience. You know, it requires it's not about the therapist, it's about the client. So you just give the time for the subconscious mind to go to work with you. And once it's opening, okay, here we go. and then you run away.
Daniel's made a really good point here too, because sometimes there was a crime. Sometimes the child did do something and it, you know, maybe the child did something that, you know, and somebody ended up getting hurt.
Yeah.
And the client is still carrying the guilt of that. You know, maybe the child threw a tantrum in the back seat and they got in a car accident, mommy was killed. You know, it could be something like that. Okay, so you cannot say to the client, well, you're still in jail for a crime you didn't commit, because there was a crime in their mind. But what you can, but this is where forgiveness comes in, and this is where you can say to the adult, but as you look at that little girl, how old is she? You know, she's 4 years old, right? You put her in prison. She's been in prison for 60 years.
As Philippa said, the crime she didn't commit. Do you know another point I want to make? How many of you as well, when you're dealing with your clients and you hear the advice they've been getting off well-meaning families, and for them to understand that no wonder the fortress has gone up higher and higher and stronger because of the way the people they're telling and the well-meaning advice is just doing that. Do you know, what's the point of me even trying to get help with this if this is what so there's a lot of factors to take into consideration, isn't there, as well?
But Jacquelyn, I think that the thing there is to understand that you undertaking a therapy journey is always going to involve the environment around you. You've got to consider that for the client. Clearly you can't do PTSD resolution work when someone's still being bombed in Ukraine, you know, so you have to consider and also the impact of the therapeutic changes the client is making in their wider family. If they're not also going through therapy, like, where are they in their journey? They're going to be reacting and responding to the changes being made by the client, which are not always welcome, because people have obviously been relying on some potentially very unhealthy relationships where someone does not, they're not in their full power, then they're not full of self-confidence and self-esteem. So when that person starts to blossom and change and, you know, and come into themselves and have self-worth and self-esteem and confidence, of course family members around them can start to be really quite disgruntled. You know, so you have to be mindful of that as a client. You need to always meet the client where they're at, but understand the wider picture. So understanding that, you know, people can go on very profound personal healing journeys, but the therapist has some responsibility for ensuring that they're safe to engage in. Like, if there's ongoing abuse in the home, you know, you can say, oh, release all that now, and then they're back in that
or you go home and tell him, you stand up to him, really, when they could be getting I know exactly, and
it might not be the time for someone to do that full journey.
You know, back in the days, you know, like therapists used to send people home and tell them, you know, when you're ready to forgive, you come back to my office. Now it's like we just evolved. We don't do that.
Well, you got to understand that the family system is a petri dish for the symptoms. Right, that they're actually, you know, I just call it sleeping with the enemy. You know, the family system is part of the problem, and so you know that becomes part of the therapy. You got to figure out, like, what's going on in the client's current life. You know, if the bomb's going off in Iraq happened to be an abusive partner, okay, that you've got to find a way to insulate the client long enough that you can get them to the point where they're strong enough to look at that individual and go, I don't need this anymore, because they're still staying in that relationship for some reason. So they, you know, you got to get them, you got to make them like Teflon, that whatever's going on in that family system isn't going to stick to them. And the people that are in the family, they have an investment in maintaining the status quo. That's what's familiar. And so, you know, you'll find this, that, you know, the client will make some progress, and then all of a sudden somebody in the family, the kids, the husband, will start acting out. And what they're doing is they're trying to pull them back into the old familiar relationship patterns, because that's the comfort zone. It may be really, really dysfunctional, but it's the comfort zone for everybody. And so the client needs coaching with respect to being able to recognize that's what's going on. You know, the kids are acting up. It's not my fault. I'm changing, I'm healing. They don't even know who this person is anymore. That's got to be threatening for them. And so now you see, like, a parent can go back in and help the kids to settle down and adjust to, the good things that are happening. This isn't threatening. I still love you. I'm actually more present for you. Those sorts of things, So it's all about addressing, because there's cause and effect. You create change in a therapeutic session, then you send the client home into the family system to see what happens. That's what's going to tell you, okay, is the problem external or is it internal? What's their response to what's going on? Were they able to hold on to the changes, or did they fall back into the old patterns? Did they get triggered, or did they stay strong in that situation? It's all cause and effect. You look at what changed, and were they able to keep that change?
Yeah.
This is why you have to tell them about the zero expectations perspective. So when they go their home, it's all about them. It's not about whatever this around them. So you don't expect your parents to change. You don't expect them to accept what you're going to do. And the more you're having higher expectations from them, you're gonna just like be sucking up to them, and then at the end of the day, you'll be just like, just killing yourself over it because you're just like, you're doing it again and again and again. I'm like, how stupid I am, because I'm not expecting anything from them, and yet again I am just trying to be nice, but they're not seeing that. So you just do your hand like that. You look through that hole of that zero and look at them through the hole of that zero from zero expectations point of view, because it's all about you. It's not about them anymore. So you just like, get out, just get out.
I had a client who, she had a lot of issues. And we just kind of worked, the physical pain, and then we had to work through the emotional stuff and what have you. And at some point she said, well, it's my husband. And he was very controlling, and he was an alcoholic, and, and so I'm the victim. He prevents me. I can't get any better because of my husband, and I said, well, I can't help him. He needs to be in the chair, not you. If you want him to change,
Exactly.
he needs to be in the chair. The only person I can help is you. You need to change. And she kind of blinked and looked at me and went, I got it.
Wendie, we need to put a sticker like that. We design something, put it on the door of the office. No third party allowed. So basically, so it's not about someone that doesn't.
Well, I always say, the client comes in and sits down,
that's
but
not in the room.
You're not actually dealing with one person. When the client sits down in that chair, they just brought everyone they ever knew with them, right? So you're not just dealing with one person, and that's where you got to sit back enough, and you listen for what's between the words. You don't listen to the story. You listen to what's between the words, because there's a whole platoon inside there, and they've all got opinions, and they're in conflict with one another. So listen between the words. Don't listen to the story. It's really easy to get caught up in the story, and then you say, well, you go home and tell him to go to hell. No, you listen to what she's saying. She's saying, I'm a victim and it's not my fault, and he makes me. And who else was like that in your history? And my dad. So now you start to track back to where it's actually coming from, because for some reason that client is in that relationship because it's the right fit for them. That's what they grew up with. That's what's familiar.
Familiarity.
Right. And you've got to make the familiar so uncomfortable that they just cannot live with it anymore. And that comes through consciousness. They start to realize, wait a minute, that was wrong. That wasn't what I was about. I didn't deserve to be treated like that. Like that criticism, that had nothing to do with me. It had to do with him. That's one of the things that I say in forgiveness work. You realize that all that stuff that happened, that mom and dad, they had their problems and not your problems. Right? That's a great realization for a child. Mom and dad have problems. Those problems were there long before you were ever thought of. So it wasn't personal. And that pulls the plug right out of the whole idea that there's something wrong with me. You came in between these two people that were not completely whole and well. They had problems. They were hopelessly human. They probably had great intentions for parenting, but they messed up. Right? And we can admit that. But that doesn't mean that you have to spend the rest of your life in their shadow. You can forgive yourself and set yourself free by seeing them for who and what they were at that time. You can release the past, and you are worthy of forgiveness. You don't have to put yourself in prison one day longer. You've served your sentence. There was an old joke, that when a guy talking about his wife, he says, I should have killed her 20 years ago. I would have been up by now. Right. It's a great realization. It's like, oh, if I just actually face the problem, 20 years ago, I wouldn't be dealing with it today. I wouldn't still be living with it. So that's what forgiveness is about. It's about realizing that I have been punishing myself for the things that other people thought and said and did that I just accepted. And maybe I don't have to do that anymore.
No one kills their own spouses, it's a disclaimer, that was an analogy, okay?
Right, yeah. Metaphorically speaking.
I'm looking forward to that later.
Yeah, do not run out and kill anybody, okay?
Like relationships are like a watermelon. When you go buy a watermelon, you never know if it's like red, if it's sweet or anything like that. So basically, this is why you take that watermelon. Those two people, they made, they are like a watermelon, and then they opened that watermelon. It was red, and then they tasted it. It wasn't sweet, or it wasn't red, but it was sweet, or it wasn't neither red or sweet. So that child has nothing to do with that watermelon. Whatever has there on, it's like, it's not a bad decision that you took that woman as your wife, or it wasn't a bad decision that you took that man as your husband. It was a watermelon. Okay, it has nothing to do, my little child. It wasn't your fault. We had a relationship that looked like a watermelon, and after like 5 years, we discovered that watermelon is not edible even, and it's like full of worms. So it's not up to you. It wasn't a decision. We bought a closed watermelon. So relationships are like watermelons. This is something like that.
I thought it was hummus.
Don't let me start. For all the homosologists over
Daniel
there.
has lots of food analogies.
Mine and Tamsin are parsnips, and they Tams.
Yeah, parsnip. International Parsnip Festival right here in Suffolk. If anyone wants to attend,
there's hummus stores as well, Daniel.
Parsnip Festival.
Yeah. We go up and tangents for hours, can't we? We get lots for days on this.
It's a very silly joke, but we just pretend that we have a parsnip festival here, and everyone.
You can have your hummus internationally. We'll have our British parsnips.
There's a particular ritual around the parsnips, but anyway, I think so. The thing I wanted to say was, meet the client where they're at. Do not force forgiveness down their throat. Don't even introduce it into the conversation. Don't even use that term if they're not ready to hear it. And you should be intuitive enough to understand that could be really offensive to somebody if they're not ready to even go to that. And I don't think it's even necessary to use that word in particular. I think the whole process of a healing therapeutic journey will naturally, that somebody will start to shift and change and have new perceptions and thought, and I feel different. I've just noticed myself reacting and responding differently. I had one client who was starting to, through her therapy journey, react and respond differently within her family unit. And the mum would say to her in the middle of an argument where the client has learned how to respond differently and be calm or whatever, tool she's learned. And the mum would be raging at her saying, we haven't all had the benefit of therapy, And the daughter would say, well, go and get therapy then. But she's angry and jealous about it, but she's not prepared to take that step for herself, which leads me on to another point that I have profound respect for anyone who is brave enough and courageous enough to go on this internal journey within and start to look and heal and go on their healing journey, because it is a very courageous thing to do. All of us and humans are to run away from it, aren't they? They turn to alcohol, turn to sex, turn to shopping or whatever, and so to actually be brave enough to start to go on a healing journey, I have every respect for anyone who can do that, but you need to go at the pace of the client, and it can be incredibly, the process is a simple concept, but when you say humans are complex, and some very, very complicated things could have happened to the person that's there with you, and it could be multifaceted, multi-layered, many inner children, and you've got to go through all of that. So I say to people, we will only go a millimeter in any direction that you feel ready for. This is not like I'm going to slap a protocol on you, we're going to do this and then that's going to be sorted, and it's like, no, it will take as long as it takes. And if that person isn't ready to even have a discussion about forgiveness, don't put them through talking about it.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou, my therapist, art with me.
Yeah, good. You know, just to
They
find,
don't
you know,
have to go
something.
through it alone is the point.
Yeah. Do you know something that I want to just briefly touch before we wrap this up? We've been talking now for 2 hours. I don't, it's the time flies, isn't it? Is that when you are going through your own therapy journey, and we do get a lot of personal awareness, self-development, and you go back into the family, it's like, who do you think you are? Do you know? And it's like dealing with that as well, isn't it? That your changes, and sadly, we have to release people. They can't go where we're going next, and it's sad. Yeah. Right, guys, we've been talking for 2 hours. I said it'd be fascinating, didn't I? Do you know? And I hope you're clearer than what forgiveness actually is now, and where we stand with it, and where we introduce it into the therapeutic role. Has anybody got any questions? First, I want to say, Kerry Potts, have you got your late note for us? Turn up at this time. But the rest of you, have you got any questions to wrap it up with? Anything that you want to ask or say or comment? Daniel says, thank you, Danielle. Thank you, everyone, for this evening. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you all. Thank you for all your wonderful analogies. I am looking forward to stepping my toes back into my hypnotherapy journey again. And Danielle, we're looking forward to welcoming you back as well. Amazing.
Wonderful.
And we go, Danielle lives near me. We're going for coffee next week to talk.
That's code for beer.
Yeah. And we normally have cake, don't we? Donuts on the seafront. I've gone all carnival lately though, so it'll be I'll try my best not to eat donuts anyway. So yeah, so right, we've got Wendie's Tribe of Healers certification program. We've got the what have I got? Lots of comments here. Sponsored by, all right, where am I going? And we've got the control alt.com.
Yeah, that's Daniel's
yeah.
website. I put a link to his hypnotherapy certification program because I have a page on my website for that. Also, I have a free course. If you just go to my website, it's the hypnosis practice business system.
It's a great course, guys, as well.
It's quite comprehensive. Yeah, it gives you kind of an overview of how to set up your business.
Juanita said, thank you, also grateful for all the teachings. What an honor to learn from such a brilliant mind. And Juanita, I've always been a massive fan of your work as well. So thank you for joining us. And yeah, so yeah, with the course that Daniel is running, which is coming up very shortly, Daniel, like tomorrow. No, it's not.
Yesterday.
Yesterday. The course is going to be starting next week, actually, isn't it?
Basically, yes. So
yes, it is. Yes. So we have actually got a page on Facebook, which I am going to share on my personal profile and into the hypnosis the UK Women in Hypnosis and NLP, with Daniel and Nazim in it as well. And I'll be sharing the Facebook page on that with Wendie's links to go on and look, because the course that Daniel's got, and I'm going to be his glamorous assistant, and Dan.
the wizard's apprentice, the sorcerer's apprentice.
apprentice. I'll be making teas and coffees. So yeah, it'll be completely online, and it's going to be a completely go with the flow. We will be putting times and dates and structures in place, but we're very much aware that it's your course, and we will be working around you as well. And it's going to be from beginner right through to advanced over a period of 3 months, with a follow-up of a 6-month mentorship to continue. I've got that right there.
It's brilliant. You get the full meal deal. Daniel will hold your hand all the way through.
Yeah, and also
and he follows my system too.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we'll be offering, and we're quite last minute littles, mind, aren't we, Dan, to be fair to us. So that's what we will be offering. And for me personally, doing I did hypnoanalysis years and years ago, but I didn't have the confidence to continue. Something happened once in one of my sessions. It was quite disturbing, and I completely lost my confidence in 2012. I never actually went back to doing that style of work, and it was only when I did my retraining with Beryl, I met Wendie, that I hit the ground running with it there. Now it's my absolute favourite way to work. And I'm going to share very quickly this story, which I love. This story is an ex-military guy that had come to work with me. He speaks very openly about the work I did with him. He had a brain tumor and they couldn't get all of it out. He had a limp in his leg and he was fitting uncontrollably every day. He had no life. He had no life. So we did work very, very slowly for a year. And then we moved on to the regression work, and he hasn't had a fit since. I've had a message of him since to say that last bit of the brain tumor that they didn't think they'd get has magically disappeared. He has no limp anymore, and he has no fits any longer either, do you know? So it's just incredible. And whilst he was working with me, I used to have this healing dog called Elmo. And it was when me and him stopped working together. A week later, my dog passed away of cancer, which is very sudden. And now he refers to my dog as his angel, as his guardian angel, because it was such a beautiful story. And that's just, I think all of you guys here will agree with me. We are taught in Western therapy that we don't go there. There are always these strict boundaries in place. And we do push those boundaries. We do push them, with the client, of course, yes. And we do have the courage and the boldness to go through with that confidence then to deal with what comes up. Would you agree with me, guys, before we wrap it up?
I want to add something that Tamsin said was the kind of courage that it takes for a client to go through this.
100%.
They don't have the courage. They borrow it from you. So you have to have the courage and the confidence to be able to lead them through the dark and lonely places they must go to find the healing. So that's so critical. And I think, you know, that's what you've just spoken to was you discovering the courage to do the deeper work and the kind of results that you can get as a result.
Yeah.
Bravo.
Anything to add, Tams, before we wrap it up, lovely?
I would say that every single human being has all that they need within them for their healing journey. They've had it repressed or dissociated, or they've not been able to be in touch. It's not been safe to express anything. So all of these behaviors that come out as supposedly negative, the tantrums, all that kind of behavior, if you actually clear all the perceptions that's been heaped on them about themselves, and you get to the core of that individual, that inner child that's angry, and you release all that, you deal with it, or you hear that child, you hear they're heard, that they can express it, then you discover that actually that child is hugely courageous. That child is an incredible little being. That child has come through and survived unbelievable, unimaginable tortures, you know, and so if you're looking for that person to have courage, they have courage.
They've already had it.
It's not me giving it to them. They have courage. They just need someone there to actually hear them and believe in them and allow them to express and be heard without judgment and with compassion, and having that space for them, holding space for them to be able to express and realize how extraordinary they actually are. You know, they have everything they need within them. You know, I'm just walking by their side as a guide. I'm very privileged and fortunate to actually be able to reach these
humbling, isn't it?
have such incredible skills and abilities and attributes that, you know, that's just never been able to be safe to express. And when you release them, it's such a joy. It's such a joy to get. Do you know what, that 3-year-old you that you thought, you know, was bad and evil and nasty and devil spawn, whatever, you know, and you release that 3-year-old and like, see her in her true light or his true light, and you think, wow, what an extraordinary being. Every single client you work with has all the capacity, everything they need to heal within them. They just need someone to hear them and have, as Daniel said, the patience to take that journey with them, and the courage, actually, because it is courage, because people don't want to look at all the nasty stuff. They don't want to hear people, and it can provoke reactions in the therapist. You know, I'm not feeling comfortable about this person talking about that because I've had this experience. Well, yeah, that's your humanness. You know, whole compassion for you as well as a therapist. Remember, you know, we're all on our healing journeys. You know, you have to have compassion for you as a therapist journeying with that person, and be able to do the healing work on yourself and be humble enough to do that and not think you've got all the answers. you know, and not think that you just because you do this protocol, you've got that 100% right. No, you know, we all have to hold up our hands sometimes and say, actually, I'm struggling with this, you know. We're just revealing our humanness. But if you do that with your client and just say, look, it's just me, I'm human, you know, they appreciate that, I think. Honesty and patience.
Thank you. Yeah, very true. Danielle, do you want to add something before we leave?
Yeah, I want to say something, you know, like nobody deserves to go through that pain and agony. No one ever. And it is quite a privilege to be there for them. And there's no like joy that matches, you know, the way when you see them smile again. It's priceless. That inner child or that child is so powerful and so, I don't know, so courageous, so brave. And then when you tell them, if without that child's first breath that took without anyone teaching them how to take that breath, you wouldn't be living here.
Yeah.
So that little thing that went out and fought for your own life deserves a chance. So give them that chance.
So to finalize on one of my favorite sayings, and I hope you're going to love it as much as I do, is by Dr. Wendie. He says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Yeah. So we'll end up on a high then. So thank you so much for all of you who's joined us and who stayed with us. I'm so glad you found it as enthralling as we did. And we've also had a thank you there from Colleen as well. So thank you, Colleen. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you all on with us this evening. And I think we'll wind it up here. Say good night, no star, bonus notches. Good morning in Canada. Or good afternoon now. And very late
It's afternoon now.
Yeah. And yes, so just to remind you all, I will be adding the details to our course in the UK Women in Hypnosis and NLP on my own personal profile, Jacquelyn Haley, if you will follow me. And we look forward to welcoming you on the training. You can go forward and change those lives. Just make it life changing for people. Okay, then. Thanks all then, and we'll see you all on the next call. Night night all. Night night.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
See you all. Bye.
Thank you.